Hello. Now, you're probably a little bit confused if you're one of the more regular viewers, because normally it's car content and normally I'm just a little bit more relaxed than this. This isn't a car video, this is a sewing video, and before you click away and go somewhere else, bear with me on this. We don't all just fit into singular boxes. We all have interests that squash together and overlap and are useful. So something you learn in one field, the huge amount of things you can learn practically, just looking after an old car, for example, translates into other fields. General maintenance of a car, that translates quite happily into general maintenance of, say, a sewing machine. A lot of the sewing skills I've picked up, the way that you learn to move things and work with materials and tools, a lot of it does transfer straight back over to the car work that I do, whether that's spannering or whether that's interior work or paint work. It doesn't really matter what the skill is that you're interested in. A lot of it can be switched about and used in other fields. So, with that said, if you want to learn how to make this shirt, stick around. This is going to be a short series. It's more tutorial oriented so that you can work out how to use a particular pattern, and it covers some of the technical aspects, including how to use a sewing machine, how to do certain stitches, some of the pitfalls, and what's involved in making a piece of clothing. If nothing else, it's interesting to understand how much work goes into a garment. These days it's so easy to just go to the shop, buy something generic off a rack and put it on. And you never think about the fact that every single item of clothing has to have human involvement. Some items more than others. Even the t-shirt that you're wearing, the socks that you're wearing, the trousers, anything that you can think of that you put on your body, clothing-wise, has had human intervention. And it's a skill, it's something that takes time to develop, and in a lot of cases, unfortunately, is a skill that is overlooked and underpaid. So hopefully this short series will give you some sort of insight into what's involved in making a piece of clothing, and how making your own clothing can be quite rewarding when it comes to the end product, because you have something that fits you, something that's comfortable, something that isn't a compromise, and something that's what you wanted. Without further ado, let's go into the video itself, and thank you for sticking around this long. I hope you enjoy the content, and I hope you learn something. Today I'm going to have a go at making another one of these shirts. It is from Laughing Moon Mercantile. There's the email address. These patterns are really nice to use. They are drafted from, as I understand it, original patterns, but the patterns themselves are very modern, so they're very easy to follow. The instructions are very clear, and I've found of the patterns I've used, these ones make up in the size that they say they're going to. And there's a lot of variations on this one as well. There's several different shirt types. We are going to be making that one, but without the patch pocket, because I hate patch pockets. I've done this one before, but I wasn't happy with the bib, and this one's a bit too formal. They have a bunch of different colours that are available, some different necktie options. I might do those another time, I'm not going to do them this time. And that is your number for what this one is. I've already cut all the pattern pieces out. That is basically everything, and I'm making this one out of, well, I'm not entirely sure what fabric it is. I think it's a linen, it might be a muslin. It's definitely natural fibre, I'm just not sure what. I don't remember when I bought it. Because I want a soft collar and soft cuffs, I'm using calico for the interfacing, which is a very stiff natural cotton, and it just, you don't end up with kind of stiff and comfortable collars, but it has enough body to it to keep the shape you want and look nice. It's very easy to work with. Whenever I've used iron-on interfacing, it's always ended up going wrinkly and weird, so I don't like it. First job is get the sewing machine set up. I'm using a very old machine, but this has been a workhorse for, well, quite a long time. This is a mid-50s Singer 201K, and this machine has done, well, everything I've asked it to do. So, two main things you're going to need is a bobbin and a spool. They have different names depending on who you're talking to, and I use the names interchangeably as well. That bit goes in there, keep your thread out, and I will slide that over a little bit just to make it easier. Now, when you thread the machine, every machine is slightly different, but most Singers are exactly the same. So, your bobbin goes up on top, and the way I was taught to do this at school was you draw an N, and it's fairly fail-safe with most machines. So that's your first point, and then you come around your tensioner. There's a little metal wire loop there, so I push that up, and there's a little hook there. So that's your first leg. You're drawing the end backwards, as in you're starting from the right and going left. So you've come down round the tensioner, back up through here. This spring just works as you're sewing to keep the tension on. You thread through the eye at the top. Then you've got your diagonal for your N. Then the slightly more awkward eye there. Then on this machine, it's through that loop. And I find it easier to put the foot down. And then we will try and thread this there we go. Oops. Just done that wrong. This is like trying to tie a tie on somebody else. Actually go through that one. And you thread. That way. Foot back up. Hold your threads, and you rotate the wheel to pick up the bobbin. And there you go. You are then ready to sew. With the placket, you need to do some pressing before you actually attach it to the shirt. It does recommend this in the pattern. I've tried doing it without. It works much better when you do it with. Important thing to remember, use the pattern piece so the pointy end of the placket is on your left. Otherwise, you end up pressing it the wrong way round. The interfacing pieces serve as a guide for where to fold the fabric. So you don't need any pins, just lay your pieces together as it shows in the pattern, and then press the fold where you want it. For the point at the bottom, they recommend two ways of doing it in the pattern. One is to take the point, fold it up, and then fold this edge over. I find that a bit fiddly. So I just work around from the long edge and fold one over. And I do the next one. And that works fine for me. This fabric isn't sided, so you don't have to be as careful about which side is which. On this interface piece you can see the little point there. that lines up with one of the little points on the pattern which serves as a guide for where to fold. So when you put that on here, that lines up with your little point there. So if you've ever wondered why there's little triangles on the patterns or pattern pieces when you've seen somebody sewing, that's what those are for. Loosely fold it over with your fingers and then press it with the iron. Making sure you don't iron your fingers, of course. As per the instructions on the pattern, we'll pin this in place and then we'll sew it together. One thing I did do differently, I've already cut through that piece. Normally you leave that intact and then sew it on, cut that out afterwards. This is something I keep doing, you're not supposed to, but I work with it. There we go, all ready to sew. If, like me, you've put the pins in the wrong way around, don't worry, you can take them out. So, some machines you can just go straight off. This one prefers it if you give it a little bit of help. It'll probably do with the service, it's a bit overdue. I use quite a small stitch out of force of habit. It also makes a stronger seam. This one also has a thread cutter on the back, and I do use it because it's quite practical. Once you've sewn that together, you then cut the line that you're not supposed to do first. It's quite important to make sure that when you cut these corners, you go up to the stitch line, a bit tricky to see, but you go up to the stitch line but not through it. When you turn this back out the right way around, which I'll show you in a minute, this gives you a nice sharp finish on these corners. So I'll just put you down and I'll do that. There you go. Even without pressing it, you can see that's nice and tidy. When you then do the top stitching, that all then secures down much better. So that's our next step. Next step, after you've turned the placket right side out, as in, this gets confusing. Let me explain. Okay. On your shirt front, that's what I got behind it, we have sewn in the placket, and we have sewn it to what is the front of the shirt. So this is currently on the outside, but we don't want that on the outside. So we've sewn round here, we've chopped these corners to give us a nice sharp finish. We've pre-pressed these pieces, and now we put all of this through there, and that gives us this rough shape. This is the back. So, turn it all over. This is now the front. And these are the placket pieces. And the only bit we're looking to do here is this piece. We're not pressing those lines yet, we're just pressing that section. that will become clear in a minute. So, easiest way to do this, just fold your fabric basically up to your sew line. The seam allowances on this are more generous than I usually work with. And make sure you've got all of your interfacing, if you're doing it the way I'm doing it here, together. So it all folds up together, like so. Go over there, you. Bit fiddly, but there we are. This fabric presses very easily, but it doesn't crease, so I don't think it's linen. It behaves a lot more like cotton, so I begin to think this is probably a cotton muslin. That's fine, it's a good material for a shirt, especially one like this where I wanted a nice lightweight, soft shirt. So, there we go. Then these bits you pressed before, you'll see this in a moment, but they'll fold under there and all of this will get top stitched over, but there's a bit more folding and things to do. Here's where the pattern starts to get complicated. Just why they started you off with the most difficult part of it I don't know, but that's how it goes. So, you've got your placket pieces which you've all folded and pressed lovely. The first thing you need to do is you fold, because this was all laid out flat. You have to fold this side first, and you fold it to meet the seam line from this piece and this piece before, and then you just top stitch on that edge. This will then be on the inside of the shirt, so that folds over that way. After that's done, you then have to take this side, that folds over that way, and that will need sewing down that line around the point and then back across. That will catch all of this loose end up here, and it will mean there's no stress on that area. So when that's all done, this will all have your buttonholes in, and that will hold your buttons. And that's also why this has the interfacing on. It gives it that extra strength so that the buttonholes and the buttons aren't under any stress. And there we go. That is one placket sewn together, as you can see. So with the sewing that you did down here for this section, that means there's no loose ends or anything around here. So now we're going to press that just to get everything straightened out where it should be. And there we go. There is just the loose thread to pop off when we get that far, but it's a very nice tiny stitch that my machine does, and it's a nice finish. And there are two more of these to do, one on each sleeve, but we'll get to that later. On the back of the shirt, to help with comfort around the shoulders, there's two sections that you need to gather. And what you see here is the fabric piece for the shirt itself, and this is the pattern piece. When you cut this out originally, the fabric is folded in half and the pattern piece put on the fabric, and that gives you the easiest way to get both halves of the back piece even. And on the pattern the instructions are to gather between the dots. Now this is a size 40, as in 40-inch chest. So what I do is I pop a pin in where the two 40s are, and that tells me where I need to put my rows of gathering. And then to make life easier, you fold the piece in half and then you pop another two pins in, and that marks it for the other side. Next we'll actually do the little bit of hand sewing required to gather those stitches. Some machines you can do that with a setting on the machine and it will do a gather stitch for you. My machine's too old for that. What we're aiming to do with the gathering on the back of the shirt is to make the various pieces line up. So this piece here is the yoke. This is it's a double layer to make the upper back of the shirt stronger because it's an area that is under a lot of stress. So you can see these little triangles, these are alignment pieces. When you hold the piece up, you can see, when you line the two triangles up in the middle, there is quite a bit too much fabric. So the goal is to bring this edge up to here, and then all of this excess fabric will be taken up with the gathers, and the gathers help do that evenly. You can do this with tiny little pleats. I have done that before, but the gathers are more comfortable. Everyone has a slightly different way to do gathers. In the instructions for this one it suggests 2 rows. So all you do is you get your hand sewing needle and you pick up your threads. You go in and out with your fabric like this, and once you've got your little needle pull the thread through. Leave it fairly long because it makes it easier later when you actually come to pull these gathers in, and you work along in 2 rows until you've got to the other pin. You can do them much smaller than this, but we're not doing haute couture, so it doesn't really matter. And when we're done, this will just be a nice, comfy, everyday sort of a shirt. To save some time, what you can do is, rather than threading a new length, leave this one as it is. Make sure you don't pull this end too tight, and then you just go back and do exactly the same thing. This is a bit tricky to do on camera. When you get to the end, pull the thread from the needle because you don't need that. You can use the loop that you've made and then get hold of both threads. And use that as like a stop, so you can pull the fabric in. You can see with the gathering that it shortens that distance quite a bit, and you can even these gathers out fairly easily. I'll do some finagling with it later, but basically what you're aiming to do is pull that in so that these two triangles here match and this edge matches. Once you've got this all gathered, you can then sew the seam, and when you sew the seam, these gathers are then held in place. And that's it, and we'll do the same for the other side, and then we will sew these bits together. With the gathering done on both sides, you can see there and there. You don't have to be very fussy about the placement of the gathers or anything like that. This is a part of the shirt that isn't really seen if you're layering it up, so it's more for comfort. So once you've got that done, you pin everything together so that your ends match and your little triangles match, which are your size guide pieces. And make sure with your gathering threads that you leave them hanging out through the face of the fabric, the garment piece thing. So just as a quick look of how that's going to look, the pins can serve as a temporary seam. You can see the gathers, they make a lot of fabric just here, because you've got the low spot of your back there where there's no gathers, and then where your actual back moves a lot in the shape, where your shoulder blades are, you want more room so it feels more comfortable and it's not as tight. And that's what these gathers do. Modern shirts, they don't tend to have this amount of fabric in the back, so they can feel a bit tight across the back and pull on your shoulders. That's why. This is much more comfortable. It's just, I don't know, some people think it's a bit blousy, but I'd rather be comfortable. With this seam sewed, the one thing I didn't show you on the pinning up stage is the two halves of the yoke, they go either side of the main body of the shirt. So when you pin it, you're sandwiching 3 layers of fabric together. Once you've done that, because you left these threads long, particularly this loop on the 2 rows of gathers, you can put your finger through the loop and just pull the gathering thread right out. Easy peasy, and it leaves you with nice clean gathers ready to be pressed on the ironing board, which will be the next job. Now we're going to sew the shoulders together. You'll have noticed so far on this shirt that all of the raw edges, I've done nothing to protect them or stop them from fraying. That's because the construction techniques mean you don't need to. So we have the front piece of the shirt here and the back piece that we've just done the pleats on there. And you can see they've pressed out quite nicely. You lay the pieces out as though the shirt is already sewn together. So this is the outside of the front, this is the inside of the back, and we are sewing the inside layer of the yoke to the shoulder for the front of the shirt. When we've done that, you'll have a visible seam here, so you take the, this is where it gets a bit confusing. So you've got those 2 pieces sewn together and sticking up like that. The back piece then comes over both, this edge rolls under, and you put a stitch over the top. That means that this raw edge here is captured inside this piece. It's one of those things that makes more sense when you do it. So I'm going to do one side and then I'll come back and show you how that looks and explain how it works. Here we go. So when you're done, you should have a seam like this. go as close to this edge as you can, and that makes for a nice sharp finish, at least on the front face. And do be careful, because this piece here, the yoke, is ever so slightly on the bias, so it will want to stretch as you sew it along. On the other side, all I've done on this side, as I said, is I've just done the seam for the inside. So this is effectively the back of the shirt. This is the front of the shirt. And you've just sewn those two together. When you've done that, if you've got a very light fabric like this one, I'd suggest snipping off these triangles. Sometimes they show through. If they're not there, it just looks smarter. But once you've done that, you bring the outside piece from the back over this seam, and you fold that under. This is tricky to do one-handed, but you fold that under to give yourself your seam like you have over here, and then you pin it down so that this edge is just a little bit below your sew line here. So when you sew it together, you end up with this nice finish. Now if you're really good, and I'm not because I'm an amateur, on the back, that line of stitching also top stitches this piece. I haven't done that, but it doesn't really matter because the garment itself is still sewn together, and the only person who's ever going to see that is you. So if it doesn't bother you, it doesn't matter. That's basically my mantra with sewing. Right, let's do the next side. With the shoulder seam sewn together, I can put it on a hanger, so you get a slightly better idea of how it's coming together. These are very long shirts. Again, that's something I personally quite like, not everybody does, but you can fiddle about with that. So, I've pressed the seam. This is on the new side, it's nice and flat now. This one went a bit better. You can see that I didn't miss the edge of the fabric so much. So with some practice you can actually get quite a nice finish. With a shirt like this, the buttons don't go all the way down, they stop about at the breastbone. Which means when you get further down, you don't get that gaping around the belly. I prefer that. I find these more comfortable, they've got more room in them. The extra length is good for me, it fits me better, but if you don't want it as long as this, you can take the fabric out. You can take the tail section, you can shorten it, you can square it off, you can take it out of the side seams here so you shorten the pattern when you cut it. But we'll see how it looks when it's done, and I personally prefer it when they're a long shirt like this.